Let's look at this first strip together. Now I have zoomed in on this image so it's a little more difficult to read the numbers on the strip. But I'll note here that if you see where the little plus sign is, this would be 120 beats per minute, 150 beats per minute, and 180 beats per minute. So when we look at this, we're trying to first determine the baseline. And baseline, remember, needs to be determined during a period of time when the baby is not being stressed and there is no activity happening in the uterus. So we look between contractions, so right in this area, and then again over here in this area. Once more at the end here. So we can see that the fetal heart rate baseline is about 150 beats per minute. The variability, again, is a little more difficult to see because of zooming in on this picture, but you can see that there's movement of the heartbeat, and it's probably between the 6 to 25 beats per minute a couple of times, but most of the time it's between 0 and 5 beats per minute change, so this would be minimal variability. Then we'll look for accelerations. That's a 20 by 20 jump in the heart rate, and that means that we'd have to see the heart rate come up to 170 for more than 20 seconds. So I just slide across here and look, does it ever reach 170? No, it doesn't. So we don't need to worry about accelerations because this baby doesn't have any accelerations. Then we'll move on to decelerations. And we do see that there are at least 2 times on the screen where we have very clear decrease in the fetal heart rate. Probably here as well we've had some decrease in the fetal heart rate. If you notice, though, the deceleration begins after the peak of the contraction. That's when we start to see the deceleration. And it resolves after the contraction ends. If you were to draw a line from the end of the contraction, you see that it's still resolving. So remember that this is a late deceleration. And late decelerations, we know, are because of uteroplacental insufficiency, which means that we want to give this mom as much possible extra blood flow to her uterus as we can. We'll increase her IV fluids, we'll give her oxygen, we'll turn her optimally on her left side, or her right side would be fine too. If she's already laying on her left side with these decelerations, then let's try another side. If she has Pitocin, we would turn off that Pitocin because we know that these contractions are causing the stress that's making the baby's heart rate decrease. We'll also check the blood pressure to be certain that it's not low blood pressure that is causing a change in the fetal heart rate related to uteroplacental insufficiency. Now let's look at this strip. We can see that the baseline is right in here, right in between these contractions when the baby's at rest. It's about 160. If you notice that this strip is numbered a bit different. It goes 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160. Second, we'll look at the variability. And overall here, we can see enough movement from beat to beat that it looks like we're moving more than 6 to 25 beats per minute most of the time. So that's going to be moderate variability. This baby has good oxygenation. Third, we'll look for accelerations, and accelerations need that 20 to 20 rule. So we'll look for the heart rate to go above 180 for at least 20 seconds. Right here it's above 180, but it's only for about 10-15 seconds because each of these blocks is 10 seconds. We'll come over this way though, and we can see that it is above 180 for about 30 or 40 seconds, so we do have accelerations. Then we'll look for decelerations. There are no decelerations that are happening routinely with contractions or routinely after contractions, but we can see that there are variable decelerations. One is here, the other one is here. Both of these look like that V shape. This actually looks more like a W shape. If you look at the variable, it goes W, down, and up right in here. So with variable decelerations, we know there's cord compression. Cord compression means we want to move the mom, get the mom off of the cord. Whatever position she's in, she should change positions. Something so that that cord will be displaced and no longer have pressure put on it. Now we'll look at our last strip. Some strips actually do have maternal information, and you'll see here that there's some maternal information with the blood pressure, the MAP, the pulse, and the oxygenation. And so let's take a moment to look at the fetal heart rate here. we can see that this fetal heart rate doesn't really have an area where it rests very well. It's more difficult to determine what the baseline would be on this fetal heart rate. This is a more accelerated, advanced strip to look at. So I'm showing you mostly because I want you to see some of these different concepts that give you an information about how a baby may differ based on the fetal heart rate. This would be called a wandering baseline, meaning I can't tell where the baseline is. It's maybe around 160 or 170. I see a few areas where it rests there, but it's really difficult to tell. The second thing we look for is variability, and this baby has minimal variability. There's not much change from beat to beat, much movement between each beat. Then we'll look for accelerations, which are difficult to find because we're not sure what the baseline is. However, if we said the baseline was 170, we don't have anywhere on this strip that it goes up to 190 and stays there for more than 20 seconds. Last, we'll look at decelerations, and we'll just note that visually, I can just see that this looks like a variable. It has that V shape, so it looks like a variable deceleration. Over here, it almost looks like maybe we have an early deceleration because do you see how it is mirroring what's happening in the contraction on the bottom? This over here might also be a variable. It kind of has a little bit of that W look. But you want to just be aware that maternal and fetal strips, as you read them, it can be difficult to make a clear determination of what's happening, and sometimes you need to say that this is a baby I need to watch a little more because I'm not exactly sure what's happening. We have minimal variability, so perhaps not well oxygenated. We have a wandering baseline, so the baby is having a really difficult time keeping its heart rate in a specific area. We have a variable deceleration. We don't have accelerations. So this is not a reassuring fetal heart rate strip. This is one to watch more carefully. We're going to come back to this strip for just a moment so that we can look at contractions. In each strip, you need to understand how that strip is set up. For these strips, each little block is 10 seconds, and it's a little more difficult to see here, I know. But when we're looking at contractions, we're trying to determine from the beginning of one to the beginning of the next. How far apart are they? So what I would do is visually say, this is 1 minute. So from here to here, 1 minute, 2 minutes, about 2.5 minutes. From this contraction, it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. And then from this contraction, we're not sure. It's 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and we don't know when the next contraction is going to start. So just from this strip, I would say that contractions are every 2.5 to 3+ minutes because we're not sure about the next contraction. Then we're going to do the duration of the contraction. So from the beginning of one contraction to the end of that same contraction. And here you'll see it's 20, 40, 60, 70 seconds. And then again 20, 40, 60, 70 seconds. So about 70 seconds. Then we'll look at intensity. If this is not an internal monitor, then we cannot tell the intensity of a contraction. However, I know this is an internal monitor because I can see these little spiky lines here are very indicative of having an internal monitor. So the mom probably coughed here and raised her internal pressure a bit. Because we have an internal monitor, we can say that the baseline of the contractions, the resting tone of the contractions, is about 20 millimeters of mercury. If it goes up to 40, 60, 70 millimeters of mercury, which it does on almost every contraction, that means 70 minus 20, it's a 50 millimeter of mercury contraction in strength. We're going to take a moment to go through this video, which is a sample video and is copyrighted by High Impact. So we're using it off of YouTube here in order to just view the content, and then I'll speak about it as we go. What this video is going to do is show us the effect that contractions have on the baby, the uterus, and the blood supply. So what you can see here is that the uterus is contracting, and the job of the uterus is to contract from the fundus and to pull the cervix up. So pull the cervix on each side. The contraction originates in the fundus. This is the uterus, and this is the cervix, as indicated by the arrows. And we see that the baby is head down in vertex position, and that the umbilical cord is connected to the placenta and to the baby. Oxygen is brought to the baby. Carbon dioxide is taken away from the baby through the maternal blood system. Remember that the placenta is functioning as the baby's lungs at this point. What you can see here is the chorionic villi of the placenta, and during a contraction, the amount of exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is decreased because the blood flow is reduced in the placenta during a contraction. Generally, when a contraction is more than 80 millimeters of mercury in strength, it means that there is very limited blood flow, if any blood flow, during that part of the contraction. The beauty of contractions is that as the uterus contracts, the oxygenation may be a bit lower. However, the contraction is only about 60 to 90 seconds in length, which allows the baby to have normal oxygenation in between. So here we can see the pressure of the contraction as measured by an intrauterine pressure catheter. The percent of uterine blood flow decreases as a contraction increases. So the higher the contraction, the less blood flow from the mom to the baby through that uterus. Now what we want to remember is that when there is decreased blood flow to the baby, that means decreased blood flow to the brain and the vital organs of the baby as well. So we don't want contractions to last a long time, and we don't want them to be one on top of each other. We want the baby to have time to relax and gather more oxygen in between contractions. So here you can see that also when a baby is head down in vertex, the intracranial pressure in the baby's head is going to increase, while the uterine blood flow percentage is going to decrease. So as the contraction comes, the intracranial pressure rises as well. So we know that if you have a normal, healthy adult, they can hold their breath for long periods of time, as long as they get a break in between, and that's true of a baby as well. We want a healthy baby to have a contraction and a break, a contraction and a break. This baby will be okay as long as it gets regular breaks in between contractions. Now we can see that what this picture is demonstrating is that as the oxygenated blood is brought to the brain, the neurons are able to fire and work correctly. During a contraction, there is less oxygen that's brought to the brain, and so there's less oxygenation of those neurons. The baby's blood pressure will rise during this period of time when the intracranial pressure is increased in order to bring more blood flow during those periods of time. This picture is showing you just that. that the mean arterial pressure is going to rise in order to compensate for the decreased blood flow that is occurring. If there's a normal contraction pattern and there's not an increase in contraction strength or duration that is abnormal, then the baby is able to get enough oxygen and there's no neurological damage. This is the way our bodies have been created in order to be able to maintain oxygenation during labor. So it's normal to have a contraction that's about 1 minute long, maybe 90 seconds long. We want less than 6 contractions in 10 minutes. And we also want at least a minute of rest time between contractions. And that rest time should be less than 20 millimeters of mercury in pressure. So if we have an internal pressure catheter, we can see that it's less than 20 millimeters of mercury and the baby is getting good oxygenation during those rest periods in between contractions. If a baby does not get those rest periods, they will not do as well during a contraction, and you may see late decelerations. Also, if a baby is already compromised when coming into labor, then they may not do as well